Another quiet night, another quiet story. Welcome to your historical lullaby. Tonight, we're going to step into a world long gone, a small European town nestled between rolling hills and whispering forests. The year is somewhere around the 16th century, and the air carries the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the last notes of evening bells echoing from the church tower. We're not here to chase battles or uncover royal secrets. Tonight's story is quieter, slower, but no less human. It's about someone whose name was rarely spoken aloud, whose shadow people avoided in the street, and whose presence brought both fear and necessity. This is the story of a medieval executioner, a man who lived on the edge of society, doing a job no one else would. But don't worry, this isn't a tale of blood or cruelty. Instead, it's a glimpse into the life of a man most would rather forget, a life filled with solitude, routine, and quiet reflection. A life that, despite its heaviness, still held moments of peace, warmth, and simple comfort. So if you're ready, now might be a good time to dim the lights, close your eyes, and let your body sink deeper into your pillow. Let's leave behind the noise of today, just for a little while. And before we begin our journey, if you feel comfortable, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a gentle comment, maybe telling me where in the world you are right now, and what time it is for you. It's always lovely to know who's listening, even if only through the quiet hours of the night. Now, take a deep breath. Let your thoughts slow down. And when you're ready, let's walk together into the past, to a time when the world moved at a different pace, and even the darkest corners of history had their moments of calm. Let's begin. Part 1. The beginning, entering the profession. Let's begin with a morning, not unlike many others in this quiet corner of the world. The sky is still painted in soft shades of blue and gray, the kind of light that feels like it doesn't want to wake anyone too quickly. There's a hush over the town, as if even the wind is walking on tiptoes so as not to disturb the sleeping rooftops. Somewhere near the edge of the village, just beyond the last row of houses where the forest begins to whisper its secrets, there's a small stone cottage. Ivy creeps along its walls, and smoke curls lazily from the chimney. Inside, behind shuttered windows, a man stirs beneath thick wool blankets. His name is Matthias. He is 32 years old, and today will be his third day as an executioner. He opens his eyes slowly, as if unsure whether he wants to face the day just yet. The room is cool, but not cold, and the only sound is the steady rhythm of his own breath. Outside, the rooster crows, not once, but twice, as though reminding everyone that another day has arrived, whether they are ready for it or not. Matthias sits up, rubbing his hands over his face. His body feels heavy, not from tiredness, but from something else, something quieter. He swings his legs over the side of the bed and reaches for the worn slippers by the bedside. They're old, patched more than once, but they fit his feet just right. The house smells of dried herbs and wood smoke. His wife, Anna, is already awake. She moves quietly through the kitchen, stirring a pot of porridge and humming a tune so softly it blends into the silence. She doesn't speak much in the mornings. Neither of them do. Words feel unnecessary when the air itself seems to understand what they're both thinking. She places a bowl in front of him, warm and steaming gently. It's simple food, oats, a bit of honey, and a few dried berries. Enough to fill his stomach, not enough to distract his mind. He eats slowly, savoring each bite, letting the warmth spread through his chest. It's a small comfort, but on days like this, small comforts mean everything. Through the window, the first rays of sunlight spill across the dirt path outside. A cart rattles by in the distance, wheels creaking under the weight of fresh bread. Smoke rises from other chimneys now, curling into the morning air like gentle ghosts. The town is waking up, one slow breath at a time. Matthias finishes his meal and stands. He walks to the wooden peg by the door and takes down his coat. It's heavy, made of thick wool, lined with fur. It smells faintly of ash and pine, a mixture of the hearth and the forest. He pulls it on slowly, fastening each button with deliberate care. Anna watches him without saying anything. Her eyes follow his hands, his shoulders, the way he adjusts the collar before stepping outside. She knows what today means. She always does. But she never asks, and he never explains. The morning air greets him like an old friend, crisp, familiar, grounding. He inhales deeply, feeling the chill settle into his lungs, clearing away whatever thoughts had been lingering in the corners of his mind. He walks slowly, boots crunching softly against the frozen earth. The streets are nearly empty, save for a few early risers who glance at him and then quickly look away. No one says good morning. No one waves. That's how it's always been. And somehow, Matthias has grown used to it. Not because it doesn't hurt, it does, but because pain, like silence, becomes easier to carry when you've known nothing else. As he passes the baker's shop, he sees the boy inside, stacking loaves on the counter. For a brief moment, their eyes meet. The boy gives a small nod, almost imperceptible, and Matthias returns it. It's not much, but in a world where most pretend he doesn't exist, even the smallest acknowledgement feels like a gift. He continues walking, past the blacksmith's forge, past the well where women gather in the late afternoon to draw water and share gossip. He imagines them talking about him sometimes, not out of malice, but out of curiosity. What kind of man does this job? What goes through his mind? Does he dream of blood at night? But none of them have ever asked. And Matthias has never offered. He reaches the edge of town where the road narrows and turns into a winding path through the trees. Here, the air feels different, quieter, older, as if it carries the memories of every step that has ever passed this way. He slows his pace, listening to the rustle of leaves overhead, the distant call of a bird somewhere deep in the woods. This is where he comes when he needs to think, not about work, not about people, but about himself. About who he was before all of this, and who he might still become. There's a bench carved from tree roots, half hidden by moss. He sits down, resting his elbows on his knees, fingers laced together. He closes his eyes and listens, not to thoughts, but to sounds. The breeze brushing against his skin. The soft crackle of twigs underfoot. The steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. He thinks about the stories his mother used to tell him when he was a child, tales of knights and dragons, of brave men who saved kingdoms and were celebrated in songs. He wonders if any of those heroes ever felt the way he does now, uncertain, alone, wondering if they were doing the right thing. He wasn't born into this life. He didn't choose it. Circumstance brought him here, poverty, desperation, and a town that needed someone willing to take the job no one else would. He could have said no. But then, where would he and Anna have gone? What would they have eaten? Who would have taken them in? So he said yes. And now, every morning begins like this, quiet, slow, thoughtful. Not because he fears what he must do, but because he tries, every single day, to remember who he is underneath it all. A man. A husband. A neighbor. A person who likes warm porridge and quiet mornings. Someone who can still feel the sun on his skin and hear the birds singing in the trees. Someone who, despite everything, still hopes for peace. When he finally gets up from the bench, the sky has turned a softer shade of blue, and the sun is higher now, warming the tops of the trees. He stretches his arms above his head, lets out a long breath, and begins the walk back toward town. Not with dread. Not with pride. Just with purpose. Because today, like every day, he will do what must be done. And tonight, when the fire is lit and the stars begin to appear, he will sit by the hearth, wrap his hands around a cup of warm tea, and try, once again, to find peace in the silence. The forest path behind Matthias is already quiet again. His footsteps have faded into the earth, and the wind has returned to its slow, steady rhythm through the branches above. The morning sun moves higher now, casting long shadows across the mossy stones that line the trail. As he walks back toward town, the world around him feels unchanged. The trees still stand where they always have. The birds still sing the same songs. Even the air carries the same scent, a mix of pine, damp leaves, and something faintly smoky from the distant chimneys. Everything seems untouched by the weight Matthias carries with him every day. But perhaps that's the nature of silence. It doesn't change the world, but it changes the way you see it. He reaches the edge of the village once more, stepping onto the familiar dirt road that winds through the heart of town. A few people are out now, a woman hanging laundry on a line, an old man sweeping his doorstep, children chasing each other between wooden fences. Life continues, as if unaware of the thoughts pressing gently against Matthias' chest. He keeps his pace steady, not too fast, not too slow. He knows what lies ahead. Not just the work itself, though that is part of it, but the feeling that comes after. The hush that follows. The way people avoid his gaze. The way even laughter seems to pause when he walks past. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when he could walk through the market square without heads turning away. When he could trade a few coins for fresh bread and receive a nod in return. When he was just Matthias, a man with calloused hands, a fondness for warm soup, and a smile that came easily. But that Matthias feels like someone he knew long ago, someone who lived before the job, before the silence. He passes the tailor's shop, where the widow Frau Elizabeth sits outside with her needlework. She sees him, but she does not look up. Her hands keep moving, pulling thread through fabric with quiet determination. It's not cruelty, she's simply learned how to live beside him without looking too closely. Matthias understands. He reaches the small stone building near the town square, not quite a prison, not quite a courthouse, but somewhere in between. It smells faintly of damp wood and old paper, of dust and ink and forgotten things. He steps inside without knocking. There's no need. Inside, the air is cooler, quieter. A single candle burns on the desk, casting flickering light across the worn pages stacked neatly at the corner. A guard nods at him, not with warmth, but with recognition. They don't speak much either. Today's task is not complicated. No great crime, no public spectacle. Just a man who stole bread from the miller's storehouse, and another who was caught fighting in the tavern. Their punishment is decided, lashes, not death. But it must be carried out all the same. Matthias prepares quietly. His tools are simple, a sturdy whip, clean water, a cloth for sweat. He checks everything carefully, not because he expects mistakes, but because routine helps steady his mind. Doing things the same way each time gives him something to hold on to. Outside, a small crowd begins to gather. Not many, just enough to make their presence known. Children peek from behind their mothers' skirts. Men talk in low voices. Women watch with guarded eyes. None of them cheer. None of them cry. Most simply observe, as if trying to understand what kind of man Matthias truly is. He stands at the post, waiting. The first man is brought forward, young, no older than 20, eyes wide with fear. Matthias doesn't speak to him. There is nothing to say. Words won't ease the pain, nor will they erase what must happen. The lashes begin. Matthias works steadily, not with cruelty, not with pleasure, only with precision. Each strike lands with measured force, just enough to remind, not to destroy. He watches the man's face twist, the tears come, the body tense and then sag. And then it is over. The second man is older, rougher. He curses under his breath but does not flinch. Matthias treats him the same, neither harshly nor gently, only fairly. That is what he tells himself. That is what he clings to. When the last lash is delivered, the guards lead the men away. The crowd disperses slowly, like smoke drifting into the sky. Some whisper. Others remain silent. A few glance at Matthias one last time before turning back to their lives. And then, there is quiet again. He wipes his hands on the cloth, folds it neatly, and returns everything to its place. His arms feel heavy, not from exertion, but from something deeper, the kind of tired that settles into your bones, unnoticed until you try to move again. He steps outside into the afternoon light. The sun is still shining. Birds still chirping. Life still unfolding. And yet, something feels different. Not in the world, but within him. He walks slowly, not toward home, but toward the river. It's a quiet stretch beyond the town, where the water flows gently and the reeds sway with the breeze. He finds a flat rock near the bank and sits down, letting his legs dangle slightly above the surface. The river doesn't judge. It simply moves, carrying whatever is thrown into it, leaves, twigs, memories. Sometimes, Matthias imagines his thoughts floating away with the current, disappearing into the distance without a trace. He closes his eyes and listens to the water. It makes a soft sound, not loud, not sharp, just constant. Like breathing. Like heartbeat. Like life itself. He thinks about Anna again. About the way she never asks questions. About how she always waits for him, no matter how late he returns. About how she sometimes places a hand on his shoulder, not to comfort, but just to remind him that she's there. She never says the words aloud, but he hears them anyway. You're still here. You're still human. He leans back slightly, letting the warmth of the sun reach his face. His muscles relax, just a little. His breath slows. For a moment, just a moment, the silence doesn't feel so heavy. He watches a bird land on a nearby branch, tilting its head as if studying him. Then, without warning, it flies off, wings slicing through the air with effortless grace. Matthias watches it disappear into the sky, envying the freedom he'll never fully know. But still, he stays by the river. Still, he breathes. Still, he hopes. Because even in the quietest corners of history, even in the most unspoken roles, there is room for peace. Even for a man like Matthias. Even for someone who, despite everything, still dreams of being seen, not for what he does, but for who he is. Part 2, Family and the Small House on the Edge of Town. As the sun begins its slow descent behind the hills, painting the sky in soft hues of amber and lavender, Matthias walks home. His steps are slower now, not from fatigue, but from a kind of quiet reflection that always follows the day's work. The town is quieter in the evening, the markets have closed, the children have been called inside, and even the wind seems to settle into a gentler rhythm. His home waits for him at the edge of town, where the last row of houses gives way to open fields and the whispering trees beyond. It is a modest cottage, built of stone and timber, with ivy curling along its walls and smoke rising gently from the chimney. From the outside, it looks like any other home, but those who pass by rarely stop. Few knock on the door. Even fewer offer greetings. Matthias pauses just before stepping onto the worn path leading to the front door. He lets his eyes trace the outline of the roof against the fading light, the small window where a candle flickers softly inside. There is comfort in knowing someone is waiting for you, even if they never say it out loud. He pushes the door open slowly, and warmth greets him like an old friend. The scent of herbs and simmering broth fills the air, mingling with the faint wood smoke from the hearth. Anna stands near the stove, stirring a pot with steady hands. She doesn't turn around right away. She knows his footsteps, knows when he has returned without needing to be told. She hums a tune under her breath, something gentle, something familiar. It reminds Matthias of evenings long ago, before all of this, when they were simply two people sharing a life together without the weight of silence pressing between them. He removes his coat carefully, folding it over the back of a chair before taking a seat at the small wooden table in the center of the room. The surface is worn smooth by years of use, marked by scratches and dents, but it is sturdy, like their home, like their marriage, like the life they've built together. Anna brings over a bowl of soup, steam curling gently into the air. It's simple fare, root vegetables, barley, a bit of salt. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasted. Just enough to nourish the body and warm the soul. They eat in quiet, not out of discomfort, but out of understanding. Some days, words feel unnecessary. Some days, silence is the most honest thing between them. Outside, the wind stirs the leaves, and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, the fire crackles softly, casting long shadows across the walls. A cat curls up near the hearth, tail twitching occasionally in its sleep. After dinner, Matthias takes the empty bowls to the sink, rinsing them with water drawn from the bucket by the door. Anna moves to the shelves, selecting a book bound in worn leather, one of the few treasures they own. She opens it carefully, running her fingers over the pages as though touching memories. It is a collection of fables, passed down through generations. The ink is faded in places, the edges of the pages curled from years of turning. But it is theirs, and it holds stories that still speak, even in silence. She reads aloud, her voice low and steady, filling the room with gentle sounds. The tale tonight is about a fox who wanders far from his den, searching for peace among the hills. Matthias listens, eyes half closed, letting the words drift through the space like wind through tall grass. There is something deeply grounding about this ritual, the shared meal, the quiet reading, the glow of candlelight. It reminds Matthias that there is more to his life than what others see. That he is not only the man who carries out justice, but also the man who washes dishes, who listens to stories, who tucks his wife in with a soft kiss on the forehead before slipping beneath the blankets himself. Later, as they lie side by side in bed, the house settles into stillness. The fire dims, the wind slows, and the world beyond their walls feels distant, almost unreal. Anna turns toward him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. No words are spoken. None are needed. Because here, in this small house at the edge of town, Matthias is not the executioner. He is simply a man, loved and understood. And for tonight, that is enough. Morning comes again, not with fanfare or urgency, but in the quiet way it always does, a slow light slipping through the shutters, birds beginning their soft conversations from the trees beyond the house, and the distant sound of footsteps on packed earth as someone makes their way to the market square. Inside the cottage, Matthias stirs beneath the heavy wool blankets. He doesn't open his eyes right away. Instead, he listens, to Anna's steady breathing beside him, to the faint creak of the wooden beams settling into the day, to the gentle hum of life unfolding just outside the walls. He exhales slowly, feeling the night's stillness give way to the rhythm of morning. Anna is already up. He can hear her moving about the kitchen, lighting the fire, placing the kettle over the flame. She moves with a kind of grace that never seeks attention, every motion purposeful, yet unhurried. There is comfort in knowing what will happen next, and waking up to a world that follows its own familiar pattern. Matthias sits up, rubbing his hands over his face before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His feet find the floorboards, worn smooth by years of use, and he stands, stretching his arms toward the ceiling. His body feels rested, though his mind still carries the weight of yesterday's work like a shadow just behind his thoughts. But this is how it has always been. The past never fully leaves, but neither does it have to define the present. He walks barefoot across the room, pausing at the window to look outside. The sky is clear, painted in soft blues and pale golds. A thin layer of frost clings to the grass, catching the early light like tiny diamonds scattered across the earth. Smoke curls from other chimneys now, rising lazily into the crisp morning air. The world is waking up, one quiet breath at a time. Anna turns as he approaches the table, setting down a cup of warm herbal tea before him. It smells faintly of mint and lavender, soothing without being overpowering. He wraps his hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. They don't speak much in the mornings. They've never needed to. Words are not the only way to share space, after all. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than conversation, especially in a home where both know exactly what the other is thinking. Outside, a rooster crows, followed by the soft clucking of hens scratching at the dirt. A neighbor passes by, carrying a basket of freshly gathered eggs. She sees Matthias watching from the window and offers a small nod, not out of fear, not out of pity, but simply acknowledgement. That is enough. After finishing his tea, Matthias rises and begins his morning routine. He folds the blankets neatly, tidies the bedroom, and opens the shutters just enough to let in fresh air without letting the cold settle inside. Each action is done with care, not because they must be perfect, but because they must be done, and doing them well brings a strange kind of peace. He steps outside for a moment, standing barefoot on the stone path that leads to the garden. The frost bites slightly at his skin, but he doesn't pull away. Instead, he inhales deeply, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. There is something grounding about this, the feel of the earth beneath his feet, the scent of damp soil and pine needles, the way the world stretches awake alongside him. Back inside, Anna has finished preparing breakfast, thick slices of rye bread, soft cheese, and a pot of stewed apples sweetened with honey. It is simple food, nourishing and warm. They eat slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the quiet sounds of the house around them. Later, as they clean up together, Matthias notices how Anna moves, the way she hums under her breath, the way she wipes the counter with practiced ease, the way she pauses just long enough to glance at him when she thinks he isn't looking. She knows him better than anyone else ever could. And perhaps that is why she never asks about his work. Because she already knows the answer. Instead, she chooses to build a home around it, not in spite of who he is, but because of it. After breakfast, Matthias steps outside once more, this time pulling on his boots and coat. He walks along the edge of the garden, inspecting the herbs Anna tends to so carefully: rosemary, thyme, sage. Each plant has its place, its purpose. Nothing is wasted. Everything has meaning. He crouches down, brushing his fingers over the leaves, feeling the texture between his fingertips. It grounds him, reminds him that even in the most unexpected places, life continues to grow. In the distance, the forest waits, quiet, patient, eternal. He watches a bird take flight from a nearby branch, wings slicing silently through the morning air. For a moment, he envies its freedom. But then he remembers, here, in this place, he is not lost. He is simply living. And that, too, is a kind of peace. He returns to the house, stepping inside just as Anna finishes folding the last of the laundry. She glances up at him, offering a small smile, not one of joy, not one of sorrow, but simply one of understanding. They sit together near the hearth, each with a book in hand, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the wind shifts, rustling the branches. Inside, the world feels still. And for the first time in days, Matthias allows himself to breathe without hesitation. Because here, in this small house at the edge of town, surrounded by quiet routines and shared silences, he finds something rare. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. But something close to peace. Something real. Something his own. Part 3, A Day Like Any Other. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the dirt path that ran alongside Matthias's home. The frost had melted into damp earth, and a soft mist still clung to the fields beyond the garden. The world felt slow, as if it had no intention of rushing anywhere. Inside the cottage, Anna was already moving through the quiet rhythm of her day, folding clean linens, sweeping the stone floor with a worn broom, humming a tune so softly it seemed to blend into the silence. The fire in the hearth crackled gently, sending out waves of warmth that wrapped around the room like an old blanket. Matthias sat at the table, his hands curled around a second cup of tea. He watched her for a moment, not with longing or sadness, but with something quieter, appreciation. It wasn't something he said often, but he felt it every day. In the way she kept their home running, in the way she made even the smallest things feel meaningful. Today was not different from any other day, not yet, anyway. There were no scheduled tasks waiting for him outside the house, no summons from the town square. For once, there was space between responsibilities, a rare pause in the rhythm of his life. And so, they let themselves stay in it a little longer. Outside, a chicken pecked at the ground near the edge of the garden, scratching idly at the soil. Another clucked softly from behind the wooden fence, watching the bird hop from one branch to another above. Life moved slowly here, without urgency. Matthias stood after finishing his tea, placing the empty cup beside the sink before stepping outside. His boots crunched lightly against the packed earth as he walked toward the back of the house, where a small shed leaned slightly to one side. Inside, tools hung neatly on hooks, a spade, a rake, a pair of shears dulled by time but still useful. He reached for the rake and stepped into the garden, where Anna had already begun tending to the rows of herbs. The soil was soft beneath his feet, rich with the scent of damp earth and greenery. He worked quietly beside her, raking away last night's fallen leaves, clearing the path so nothing would grow tangled. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. There was comfort in shared silence, and knowing that someone else understood the weight of your thoughts without needing to ask. A breeze stirred the tall grasses beyond the garden, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Somewhere nearby, a squirrel scurried up a tree, its tail flicking as it disappeared into the branches. Matthias paused for a moment, leaning on the rake, letting the sun warm his face. He closed his eyes just briefly, listening to the sounds around him, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the steady hum of insects moving through the air. It was peaceful. Not perfect, but peaceful. Later, after finishing in the garden, he returned the rake to the shed and wiped his hands on the cloth hanging from a nail near the door. Anna went inside to prepare lunch while he walked a short distance to the well, drawing up a bucket of cool water. He splashed some onto his face, feeling the chill wake him fully, washing away the last traces of sleep. Back inside, Anna had set the table with fresh bread, cheese, and a bowl of warm stew left over from the previous evening. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, letting the food settle into their bodies like a gentle reminder that they were still here, still together, still living. Afterward, Matthias took the dishes to the sink, rinsing them carefully before setting them aside to dry. He dried his hands on a cloth and turned to find Anna seated by the window, needle in hand, working on mending a torn sleeve from one of his coats. She looked up when he approached, offering a small smile before returning her attention to the fabric. He sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the way her fingers moved with practiced ease. There was something calming about this, the ordinary moments, the small acts of care, the way they built a life not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. Outside, the sky remained clear, though clouds gathered slowly along the horizon. The wind shifted slightly, bringing with it the promise of rain later in the day. But for now, everything was still. Matthias stood again, slipping on his coat before stepping outside once more. He followed the narrow path that led past the garden and into the field beyond, where wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze. He walked without purpose, simply allowing himself the luxury of movement, of space, of solitude without loneliness. He passed beneath the shade of an old oak tree, pausing to run his hand along its rough bark. He remembered sitting here once as a boy, long before he became what he was now, carving his name into the trunk with a knife borrowed from his father. That mark was likely gone by now, worn away by time and weather. Still, he liked to think it was still there somewhere, hidden beneath layers of new growth. He continued walking, reaching the edge of the forest where the trees stood taller, their trunks thick and silent. He stepped into the shade, breathing in the scent of moss and damp earth. Here, the world felt older, slower, more patient. He found a fallen log and sat down, letting his breath settle into the rhythm of the forest. Birds called to one another from high above, and somewhere deeper in the woods, a deer moved quietly through the underbrush. Matthias closed his eyes again, listening. No thoughts came demanding attention. No memories surfaced uninvited. Just the sound of the world around him, steady and constant. For a long while, he stayed there, letting the silence hold him. Letting the forest breathe with him. Letting himself be. When he finally rose, the sky had grown darker, and the first drops of rain began to fall. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and began to walk back toward home, following the familiar path through the field, past the garden, and toward the small stone cottage that waited for him. As he stepped inside, Anna glanced up from her sewing, offering another quiet smile. She didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed him a dry towel and gestured toward the chair beside the fire. He accepted both without a word, settling into the seat as the flames danced before him. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the roof. Inside, the world was still. And for today, that was enough. The rain continued through the afternoon, a soft and steady rhythm tapping against the roof like fingers drumming a lullaby on wood. Inside the cottage, the fire burned low but constant, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. The scent of damp wool lingered in the air as Matthias sat by the hearth, wrapped in the quiet warmth of home. Anna moved about the room with practiced ease, folding clean clothes, tidying small things that didn't truly need tidying, just keeping her hands busy, as she often did when the day stretched long before them. She placed a fresh log onto the fire, watching it catch slowly, sending up a curl of smoke that danced toward the chimney. Outside, the world was softened by the rain. The garden glistened with droplets clinging to leaves, and the path leading to the house had turned into a gentle mixture of mud and crushed grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder murmured quietly, distant and unhurried, like an old man clearing his throat before telling a story he's told many times before. Matthias watched the flames for a while longer before rising from his chair. He moved toward the shelves along the far wall, where their few books were lying neatly beside jars of dried herbs and a small wooden box carved with delicate patterns. He traced his fingers over the spines, feeling the worn edges beneath his touch. Books were rare treasures in their world, not because they were expensive, but because time wore them down faster than people could replace them. Still, they had managed to keep a handful, passed down or gifted, each one holding stories that felt like memories of another life. He selected one bound in faded green leather, its pages yellowed with age. He carried it back to his chair, settling in with a slow exhale, letting the weight of the book rest in his lap like something familiar. Anna glanced at him briefly, then returned to her sewing without a word. They had learned long ago that silence between them wasn't absence, it was presence, spoken in a different language. As Matthias opened the book, he let his eyes drift over the first few lines, though he didn't read them aloud. This was not a story meant for sharing, not tonight. It was something for himself, a way to fill the spaces between thoughts, between breaths, between the moments when the past tried to press too heavily against his chest. He skimmed the pages slowly, letting the words settle into his mind like pebbles dropped into still water, rippling outward, then fading into calm. After some time, he closed the book gently and set it aside. The fire had burned lower now, its glow softer, more intimate. Anna joined him on the other side of the hearth, placing her needlework in her lap. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she simply sat, allowing the quiet to stretch between them like a blanket woven from years of shared silences. It was in these moments that Matthias felt most at peace, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because nothing needed to. Here, in this small space, he was not the executioner. He was not the man people avoided in the street. He was not the shadow that passed unnoticed through town. Here, he was simply Matthias. A man who liked warm fires and dry socks. A man who knew how to mend a broken rake handle and plant herbs that smelled like memory. A man who, despite everything, still found joy in the smallest things, the taste of fresh bread, the sound of rain, the warmth of another body beside his own at night. And perhaps that was enough. Later, as evening deepened into night, Anna rose and began preparing supper. She stirred a pot of thick stew made from root vegetables and barley, the scent filling the room with a comforting earthiness. Matthias helped by slicing fresh bread, his knife gliding smoothly through the crust. They ate together at the table, the only sounds being the occasional clink of spoon against bowl and the faint patter of rain against the window panes. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, rustling the branches with a hush that sounded almost like a whisper. When they finished eating, Matthias tipped the dishes to the sink once more, rinsing them carefully before setting them aside to dry. As he worked, he listened to Anna moving softly behind him, lighting a second candle near the bed, adjusting the blankets, making sure everything was in place for sleep. She never asked if he would have trouble falling asleep. She never questioned whether the day had weighed too heavily on him. Instead, she simply prepared the space around him, wrapping him in comfort without ever needing to say a word. After washing his hands, Matthias stepped into the bedroom, pulling off his boots and loosening the top buttons of his shirt. He climbed beneath the heavy wool blankets, feeling the coolness of the sheets give way to the warmth of his body. Anna followed shortly after, settling in beside him, her breathing already slowing into the rhythm of sleep. He lay on his back for a moment, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the rain outside and the quiet hum of the fire within. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. There would be work again, sooner or later. People would look away again. The silence would follow him again. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was here. In this bed. In this home. With someone who understood him better than anyone else ever could. And as his eyelids grew heavier, as his breath slowed into the steady pattern of sleep, Matthias allowed himself to believe, even if just for a little while, that peace was not something far away. It was right here. In the quiet. In the stillness. In the love of a woman who never needed to ask what kind of man he was. Because she already knew. And she stayed anyway. Part 4, Lonely Evenings. As the last light of day faded behind the hills and the sky deepened into a soft shade of indigo, Matthias sat by the hearth in his small cottage at the edge of town. The fire burned low and steady, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like an old friend sharing secrets only the night could understand. Anna had already gone to bed, curling beneath the thick wool blankets with a quiet sigh that told Matthias she was both tired and content. He hadn't followed her just yet, not because he wasn't ready for sleep, but because there was something about this time of night that always drew him inward, toward thoughts he rarely shared aloud. The house felt smaller at night, not in size, but in presence, as if the world beyond its walls had pulled away slightly, leaving only this quiet space between four walls and a wooden roof where he could simply be. He leaned back in his chair, hands resting lightly on his lap, eyes half closed as he listened to the gentle crackle of the fire. The scent of burning wood filled the air, mingling with the faint herbal notes from the bundles hanging near the ceiling, lavender, sage, rosemary. Each one carried a memory, a purpose, a whisper of comfort. Outside, the night was alive in its own way. A distant owl called softly from somewhere deep in the forest, and the occasional rustle of leaves suggested that something small and unseen was moving through the underbrush. Closer by, a branch tapped gently against the window pane, not forcefully, but like a quiet knock, a reminder that even in solitude, he was never truly alone. Matthias exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle more comfortably around his shoulders. Not heavy, not painful, just present. It was a familiar kind of silence, one that had grown with him over the years, wrapping itself around him like a well-worn coat. And in this silence, his thoughts began to wander, not wildly, not chaotically, but gently, like leaves drifting down from a tree on a still autumn afternoon. He thought about what it meant to live a life like his, one that others saw but did not understand. One that people acknowledged without ever really seeing him. He wondered how many nights had passed like this, with him sitting here, watching the fire, listening to the wind, asking himself the same questions he would never speak out loud. Did he deserve the loneliness? Not punishment, not exactly. But perhaps a kind of self-imposed distance, a space he kept between himself and the rest of the world, just to make sure no one got too close. Because once you carry a job like his, people see you differently. They don't say it outright, but they feel it. And so do you. He turned his gaze toward the window, where the moonlight spilled across the garden like liquid silver. The frost had returned, coating the grass in a delicate layer of white. The chickens were tucked safely inside their coop, and the cat had curled up near the hearth, tail twitching slightly in its sleep. Everything felt still. Everything felt safe. And somehow, that was enough. He reached for the cup of tea cooling beside him, lifting it carefully and sipping slowly. It was warm, soothing, not sweet, not bitter, just right. Just like the nights themselves. Not perfect. Not exciting. But peaceful. Matthias let his mind drift again, not toward work, not toward fear, but toward simpler things, the sound of Anna's breathing in the next room, the rhythm of his own heartbeat, the soft hum of life continuing quietly outside. There were nights when he imagined walking beyond the forest, past the fields, and to places where no one knew his name or his trade. Nights when he dreamed of being someone else, a farmer, a carpenter, a man who could walk through town without heads turning away. But those dreams didn't come often. Because in truth, he had learned to live within the boundaries of his own life, to find meaning in the small things, to build peace in the spaces where others might only see emptiness. He thought about the stars above, distant, unreachable, but always present. How strange it was that something so far away could feel so close, especially at night. Like silent witnesses to every thought, every breath, every quiet moment of surrender. He closed his eyes again, letting the sounds of the evening wrap around him like a blanket. No rush. No pressure. No need to explain anything to anyone. Just this. Just now. Just him, sitting by the fire, breathing in the cool night air, letting the silence hold him. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe, even if just for a little while, that peace was not something far away. It was right here. In the quiet. In the stillness. In the love of a woman who never needed to ask what kind of man he was. Because she already knew. And she stayed anyway. The fire had burned lower now, its glow soft and steady, casting long shadows that danced gently across the wooden beams overhead. Outside, the wind had quieted, leaving behind only the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint hoot of a distant owl, sounds so subtle they felt more like thoughts than actual noise. Matthias remained seated in his chair by the hearth, wrapped in the stillness of the night like a second blanket. His cup of tea was nearly empty, but he held it anyway, letting the last warmth linger between his palms. He liked this time of night, not because it erased anything, but because it gave him space to simply exist without expectation or interruption. There was something deeply grounding about these quiet hours. No one watching. No one judging. Just the rhythm of his own breath, the slow ticking of the wooden clock on the wall, and the occasional creak of the house settling into sleep alongside him. He turned his head slightly toward the bedroom door, where a thin line of candlelight spilled softly onto the floorboards. Anna had left it burning just enough to guide her if she woke during the night. It was a small gesture, but meaningful, proof that even in darkness, there were tiny lights meant to lead you back home. Matthias didn't move to extinguish it. Instead, he let himself watch the flickering glow dance along the edges of the doorway, imagining the way it might reflect off the walls inside their room, warm, soft, familiar. He thought about how different the world felt at night. During the day, everything moved with purpose, people walked faster, voices carried farther, the sun seemed to demand attention from everyone beneath its gaze. But at night, things slowed down. Conversations faded. Steps softened. Even time itself seemed to stretch, giving you more moments to breathe, to think, to feel. And sometimes, when the silence grew deep enough, Matthias could almost forget who he was supposed to be. Not the executioner. Not the man people avoided in the street. Just Matthias. A man who liked warm fires and quiet evenings. A man who found comfort in routine. A man who still remembered what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who loved him without condition. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. He leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to sink deeper into the hush of the night. Outside, a single leaf drifted down from the old oak tree near the garden, landing gently on the damp earth below. Inside, the fire popped softly, sending up a few embers that danced briefly before fading into ash. Matthias opened his eyes again, gazing toward the window where moonlight poured through the glass in pale silver ribbons. The sky was clear tonight, revealing a tapestry of stars scattered like distant memories across the heavens. Some shone brighter than others, but none of them blinked. They simply watched, quietly, patiently, eternally. It was strange how much peace could be found in looking at them. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer answers. They simply were. And somehow, that was exactly what Matthias needed. He reached for the woolen shawl draped over the arm of the chair and pulled it around his shoulders, adjusting it carefully before settling back into the cushion. The cold had crept in slightly, not sharply, but just enough to remind him that night had fully arrived. He didn't mind. Cold nights often brought clarity. They stripped away distractions, peeled back layers, left only what was essential. And what was essential, more often than not, was silence. Not the kind that felt heavy. Not the kind that felt lonely. But the kind that felt like a hand resting lightly on your back, steady, reassuring, present. He let his thoughts drift again, not toward work, not toward fear, but toward memory. A summer evening long ago. A field bathed in golden light. His mother's voice calling him in for dinner. The scent of bread baking in the oven. That version of himself felt very far away now, the boy who didn't yet understand the weight of the world, who believed that life would always unfold gently, that kindness would always be returned, that people would always see him for who he truly was. But even though that boy no longer existed, Matthias still carried pieces of him, in the way he treated animals with care, in the way he spoke softly to children who dared to look him in the eye, in the way he tried to leave the world just a little better than he found it. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. But he tried. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of history, trying was enough. He shifted slightly in his chair, stretching his legs out in front of him, letting the warmth of the fire settle into his bones. He listened to the sound of his own breathing, slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the night around him. Anna stirred softly in the other room, turning in her sleep, pulling the blankets tighter around her body. She didn't wake. Just moved, as if adjusting to the same quiet that surrounded them both. Matthias smiled slightly, knowing that even in sleep, she was still with him. Still here. Still choosing this life. Still choosing him. And that, more than anything else, gave him peace. He closed his eyes once more, letting the night wrap itself around him like an old lullaby. No rush. No fear. No need to explain. Just this. Just now. Just him, sitting by the fire, listening to the wind, and learning, slowly, gently, how to live with himself. How to find peace. Even in silence. Even in solitude. Part 5, The Rhythm of the Earth. The morning arrived not with fanfare or urgency, but in the quiet way it always did, a soft light slipping through the shutters, birds beginning their gentle conversations from the trees beyond the house, and the distant sound of footsteps on packed earth as someone made their way to the market square. Matthias stirred beneath the heavy wool blankets, his body slow to wake, his thoughts even slower. He didn't open his eyes right away. Instead, he listened, to Anna's steady breathing beside him, to the faint creak of the wooden beams settling into the day, to the gentle hum of life unfolding just outside the walls. He exhaled slowly, feeling the night's stillness give way to the rhythm of morning. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, mingling with the faint wood smoke rising from other chimneys. A thin layer of frost clung to the grass, catching the early light like tiny diamonds scattered across the earth. Smoke curled from the chimney of Matthias's home, rising lazily into the crisp morning air. Inside the cottage, Anna was already moving about the kitchen, lighting the fire, placing the kettle over the flame. She moved with a kind of grace that never sought attention, every motion purposeful, yet unhurried. There was comfort in knowing what would happen next, and waking up to a world that followed its own familiar pattern. Matthias sat up, rubbing his hands over his face before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His feet found the coolness of the stone floor, and he stood, stretching his arms toward the ceiling. His body felt rested, though his mind still carried the weight of yesterday's work like a shadow just behind his thoughts. But this was how it had always been. The past never fully leaves, but neither does it have to define the present. He walked barefoot across the room, pausing at the window to look outside. The sky was clear, painted in soft blues and pale golds. Frost clung gently to the garden's edges, and the reeds near the stream swayed slightly in the breeze. Life was beginning again, quietly and without ceremony. Anna turned as he approached the table, setting down a cup of warm herbal tea before him. It smelled faintly of mint and lavender, soothing without being overpowering. He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. They didn't speak much in the mornings. They'd never needed to. Words were not the only way to share space, after all. Sometimes, silence spoke louder than conversation, especially in a home where both knew exactly what the other was thinking. Outside, a rooster crowed, followed by the soft clucking of hens scratching at the dirt. A neighbor passed by, carrying a basket of freshly gathered eggs. She saw Matthias watching from the window and offered a small nod, not out of fear, not out of pity, but simply acknowledgement. That was enough. After finishing his tea, Matthias rose and began his morning routine. He folded the blankets neatly, tidied the bedroom, and opened the shutters just enough to let in fresh air without letting the cold settle inside. Each action was done with care, not because they must be perfect, but because they must be done, and doing them well brought a strange kind of peace. He stepped outside for a moment, standing barefoot on the stone path that led to the garden. The frost bit slightly at his skin, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he inhaled deeply, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. There was something grounding about this, the feel of the earth beneath his feet, the scent of damp soil and pine needles, the way the world stretched awake alongside him. Back inside, Anna had finished preparing breakfast, thick slices of rye bread, soft cheese, and a pot of stewed apples sweetened with honey. It was simple food, nourishing and warm. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the quiet sounds of the house around them. Later, as they cleaned up together, Matthias noticed how Anna moved, the way she hummed under her breath, the way she wiped the counter with practiced ease, the way she paused just long enough to glance at him when she thought he wasn't looking. She knew him better than anyone else ever could. And perhaps that was why she never asked about his work. Because she already knew the answer. Instead, she chose to build a home around it, not in spite of who he was, but because of it. After breakfast, Matthias stepped outside once more, this time pulling on his boots and coat. He walked along the edge of the garden, inspecting the rows of herbs Anna tended to so carefully: rosemary, thyme, sage. Each plant had its place, its purpose. Nothing was wasted. Everything had meaning. He crouched down, brushing his fingers over the leaves, feeling the texture between his fingertips. It grounded him, reminded him that even in the most unexpected places, life continued to grow. In the distance, the forest waited, quiet, patient, eternal. He watched a bird take flight from a nearby branch, wings slicing silently through the morning air. For a moment, he envied its freedom. But then he remembered, here, in this place, he was not lost. He was simply living. And that, too, was a kind of peace. He returned to the house, stepping inside just as Anna finished folding the last of the laundry. She glanced up at him, offering a small smile, not one of joy, not one of sorrow, but simply one of understanding. They sat together near the hearth, each with a book in hand, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the branches. Inside, the world felt still. And for the first time in days, Matthias allowed himself to breathe without hesitation. Because here, in this small house at the edge of town, surrounded by quiet routines and shared silences, he found something rare. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. But something close to peace. Something real. Something his own. Later that morning, after finishing his tea and watching Anna move through her quiet routines with the grace he had come to love, Matthias stepped outside once more. The sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the garden path, and the frost had melted into damp earth beneath his boots. The air was crisp but not cold, the kind of morning that felt like it had no intention of rushing anywhere. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and distant wood smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, a bird called out, its song light and unhurried, blending into the hush of the world waking up. Matthias didn't have any particular destination in mind as he walked. He simply let his feet find their own rhythm, following the narrow trail that led from the back of the house toward the forest's edge. The path was familiar, worn smooth by years of quiet footsteps, lined with moss-covered stones and wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. As he reached the tree line, the world changed slightly, not dramatically, not suddenly, but in a way he always noticed. The air felt cooler here, heavier with the scent of damp leaves and bark. The sounds of the town faded behind him, replaced by the rustling of branches and the occasional chirp of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. This was where he came when he needed to breathe, not just physically, but deeply, in a way that reminded him he was still part of something larger than himself. He walked slowly, letting his eyes trace the patterns of sunlight filtering through the canopy above. The leaves shimmered with golden edges, catching the light before letting it slip through to the forest floor below. A squirrel darted across his path, pausing only briefly to glance at him before disappearing into the brush. Matthias smiled slightly at the sight, appreciating the small reminder that life continued even in places where silence seemed to dominate. He followed the winding trail deeper into the woods, where the trees stood taller, their trunks thick and silent. Here, the world felt older, slower, more patient. It didn't ask anything of him, no explanations, no justifications, no apologies. It simply allowed him to be. And sometimes, that was all he needed. He paused near a fallen log, running his hand along its rough surface. Moss had grown along one side, soft and cool beneath his fingers. He crouched down, brushing away a few scattered leaves, revealing tiny insects crawling over the decaying wood. Life found a way to grow even in the most unexpected places. He thought about how much the forest resembled peace, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Present. Unshaken. He rose again, continuing forward at a leisurely pace. The wind shifted slightly, bringing with it the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off. Not enough to worry about, not yet, just enough to remind him that the world was always changing, even if it didn't always feel that way. Further ahead, a stream cut gently through the landscape, its water flowing slow and clear over smooth stones. Matthias knelt beside it, dipping his hands into the cool current, feeling the chill seep into his skin. He splashed a little onto his face, letting the sensation wake him fully, washing away the last traces of sleep. As he sat there, listening to the soft murmur of the water, he let his thoughts drift, not toward work, not toward fear, but toward memory. A summer afternoon long ago. The sound of laughter echoing through the trees. His father teaching him how to track animals by their footprints. The way the sunlight had danced across the river's surface like scattered coins. That version of himself felt very far away now, the boy who didn't yet understand the weight of the world, who believed that life would always unfold gently, that kindness would always be returned, that people would always see him for who he truly was. But even though that boy no longer existed, Matthias still carried pieces of him, in the way he treated animals with care, in the way he spoke softly to children who dared to look him in the eye, in the way he tried to leave the world just a little better than he found it. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. But he tried. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of history, trying was enough. He leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the ground behind him, letting the warmth of the sun settle into his shoulders. He listened to the sounds around him, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds, the gentle flow of water beneath his fingertips. There was something deeply grounding about this, the feel of the earth beneath him, the presence of nature surrounding him, the way time itself seemed to stretch and soften in this place. It reminded him that he was not alone. Even in solitude, even in silence, even in the spaces where no one else could reach him, he was still connected. To the land. To the sky. To the quiet rhythm of life unfolding all around him. And that connection, however subtle, was enough to hold him. Enough to steady him. Enough to remind him that peace did not always arrive in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, in the breath of the forest, and the hush of the trees, and the simple act of sitting beside a stream and remembering that you are still alive, still breathing, still capable of wonder. And that, too, was a kind of peace. Matthias remained there for a while longer, letting the stillness wrap around him like an old blanket. Then, when he finally rose, he brushed the dirt from his hands, adjusted his coat, and began to walk back toward home. Not because he needed to hurry. Not because he was avoiding anything. But simply because the moment had passed, not lost, not forgotten, but gently placed aside, like a page turned in a book he intended to return to someday. As he stepped back into the open field beyond the trees, the sun felt warmer on his face, the wind lighter against his skin. The world stretched out before him, familiar and welcoming. And as he made his way toward the small stone cottage waiting for him at the edge of town, Matthias allowed himself to believe, even if just for a little while, that peace was not something far away. It was right here. In the quiet. In the stillness. In the breath of the forest. And in the gentle rhythm of a life lived quietly, carefully, and with intention. Part 6. The Echoes of Childhood. There were mornings when Matthias woke with a memory already waiting for him, not one he had called upon, not one he had searched for, but one that arrived quietly, like the first light slipping through the shutters before the sun had fully risen. This morning was one of those. He lay still beneath the thick wool blankets, Anna's steady breathing beside him, and let the memory unfold without rushing it. It wasn't sharp or vivid, not like a dream that clings to you after waking. It was softer than that, more like a scent carried on the wind, familiar but distant, comforting but fleeting. It was the memory of being a boy. Not the boy who would grow into the man he now was, not the one who understood duty, silence, and solitude, but the boy who had not yet learned to carry weight heavier than his own laughter. The memory came in pieces, the warmth of his mother's hands as she tucked him into bed, the sound of her voice telling stories by candlelight, the way she used to hum as she worked near the hearth. He remembered how sunlight poured into their small home in the late afternoon, catching dust motes in midair and making them sparkle like tiny stars. He remembered the smell of bread baking in the oven, the taste of honey spread thick on warm slices, the way his father's boots always seemed too big for the house but just right for walking through fields and forests. Most of all, he remembered feeling seen. Not for what he might become. Not for what he could offer. But simply for being himself. That version of Matthias felt very far away now, like a book left open too long ago, its pages yellowed, its ink faded, but still holding the same story within. Still, he held on to it. Because in remembering, there was peace. And so, as the morning settled around him, Matthias did not rush to rise. He let himself stay in that space between sleep and waking, where memories didn't feel like ghosts but like old friends visiting briefly before moving on. Anna stirred beside him, shifting slightly beneath the covers, but she did not wake. She never asked about his thoughts in the early hours, she never needed to. Instead, she simply existed beside him, offering presence without demand, love without condition. He appreciated that more than he ever said. Eventually, he sat up, rubbing his hands over his face before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were cool beneath his feet, and the fire from last night had burned low, leaving only embers glowing faintly in the hearth. Outside, the world was quiet, not silent, but gently awake. A bird called from somewhere beyond the garden, and the wind moved slowly through the trees, rustling leaves like fingers turning the pages of an old book. Matthias stood and pulled on his coat, stepping outside barefoot. The grass was damp with dew, soft beneath his toes, and the sky was painted in soft shades of blue and gold. He walked slowly toward the edge of the garden, letting the cool air fill his lungs. He thought again of the boy he had been, of the games played in the fields behind his childhood home, of the way he used to chase butterflies, climb trees, and run until his breath caught in his chest, of the way he believed the world was kind, that people were good, that life would always be gentle. He did not regret growing up. But sometimes, he missed believing in things that no longer felt certain. Back inside, Anna had risen and was already moving through her quiet morning rituals, lighting the fire, placing the kettle over the flame, humming softly under her breath. She didn't ask where his thoughts had gone, nor did she try to pull him from them. She simply offered him a cup of tea when it was ready, warm between his palms, grounding him once more in the present. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the quiet sounds of the house around them. Later, as they cleaned up together, Matthias noticed how Anna moved, the way she hummed under her breath, the way she wiped the counter with practiced ease, the way she paused just long enough to glance at him when she thought he wasn't looking. She knew him better than anyone else ever could. And perhaps that was why she never asked about his past. Because she already knew the answer. Instead, she chose to build a life around it, not in spite of who he was, but because of it. After breakfast, Matthias stepped outside once more, this time pulling on his boots and coat. He walked along the edge of the garden, inspecting the rows of herbs Anna tended to so carefully: rosemary, thyme, sage. Each plant had its place, its purpose. Nothing was wasted. Everything had meaning. He crouched down, brushing his fingers over the leaves, feeling the texture between his fingertips. It grounded him, reminded him that even in the most unexpected places, life continued to grow. In the distance, the forest waited, quiet, patient, eternal. He watched a bird take flight from a nearby branch, wings slicing silently through the morning air. For a moment, he envied its freedom. But then he remembered, here, in this place, he was not lost. He was simply living. And that, too, was a kind of peace. He returned to the house, stepping inside just as Anna finished folding the last of the laundry. She glanced up at him, offering a small smile, not one of joy, not one of sorrow, but simply one of understanding. They sat together near the hearth, each with a book in hand, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the branches. Inside, the world felt still. And for the first time in days, Matthias allowed himself to breathe without hesitation. Because here, in this small house at the edge of town, surrounded by quiet routines and shared silences, he found something rare. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. But something close to peace. Something real. Something his own. The morning light had shifted slightly now, no longer the soft glow of early dawn, but something steadier, more settled. The sun hung higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden and warming the earth beneath Matthias's boots. A breeze stirred the leaves gently, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Inside the cottage, Anna was folding clean linens near the hearth, her hands moving with quiet precision. She had always been like this, careful without being slow, deliberate without being rigid. There was comfort in knowing that even on days when the world felt uncertain, she remained steady. Matthias sat at the wooden table by the window, his cup of tea cooling slowly between his palms. He watched her for a moment, not with longing, not with sadness, but simply with appreciation. It was in these small moments, the way she hummed under her breath, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, that he found peace. Outside, a chicken pecked at the ground near the edge of the garden, scratching idly at the soil. Another clucked softly from behind the wooden fence, watching the bird hop from one branch to another above. Life moved slowly here, without urgency. But within Matthias, something stirred. It wasn't discomfort. Not quite. It was memory. Not sharp or sudden, but gentle, like the hush before sleep, like the last note of a lullaby fading into silence. He thought again of his childhood, not as a story told in pieces, but as a place he could return to in his mind. A field bathed in golden light. His mother's voice calling him in for dinner. The scent of bread baking in the oven. The sound of laughter echoing through the trees. That version of himself felt very far away now, the boy who didn't yet understand the weight of the world, who believed that life would always unfold gently, that kindness would always be returned, that people would always see him for who he truly was. But even though that boy no longer existed, Matthias still carried pieces of him, in the way he treated animals with care, in the way he spoke softly to children who dared to look him in the eye, in the way he tried to leave the world just a little better than he found it. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. But he tried. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of history, trying was enough. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. He leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to sink deeper into the hush of the morning. Anna stirred softly in the other room, adjusting the folds of a freshly washed blanket before laying it neatly over the foot of the bed. She didn't speak, didn't ask if he was all right. Just moved, as if attuned to the same quiet rhythm that surrounded them both. Matthias smiled slightly, knowing that even in silence, she was still with him. Still here. Still choosing this life. Still choosing him. And that, more than anything else, gave him peace. He opened his eyes again, gazing toward the window where sunlight poured through the glass in pale ribbons. The sky was clear today, revealing a tapestry of clouds drifting lazily across the heavens. Some gathered in soft clusters, others stretched thin like brushstrokes across a canvas. It was strange how much peace could be found in looking at them. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer answers. They simply were. And somehow, that was exactly what Matthias needed. He reached for the woolen shawl draped over the arm of the chair and pulled it around his shoulders, adjusting it carefully before settling back into the cushion. The coolness of the morning had given way to warmth, but he liked the weight of the fabric, the way it wrapped around him like an old promise. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth, mingling with the faint herbal notes from the bundles hanging near the ceiling, lavender, sage, rosemary. Each one carried a memory, a purpose, a whisper of comfort. He turned his thoughts inward again, letting them drift gently, like leaves falling from a tree on a still autumn afternoon. There were days when he imagined walking beyond the forest, past the fields, and to places where no one knew his name or his trade. Days when he dreamed of being someone else, a farmer, a carpenter, a man who could walk through town without heads turning away. But those dreams didn't come often. Because in truth, he had learned to live within the boundaries of his own life, to find meaning in the small things, to build peace in the spaces where others might only see emptiness. He let his mind settle again, not toward work, not toward fear, but toward memory. A summer evening long ago. A field bathed in golden light. His mother's voice calling him in for dinner. The scent of bread baking in the oven. That version of himself felt very far away now, the boy who didn't yet understand the weight of the world, who believed that life would always unfold gently, that kindness would always be returned, that people would always see him for who he truly was. But even though that boy no longer existed, Matthias still carried pieces of him, in the way he treated animals with care, in the way he spoke softly to children who dared to look him in the eye, in the way he tried to leave the world just a little better than he found it. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. But he tried. And perhaps, in the quiet corners of history, trying was enough. He shifted slightly in his chair, stretching his legs out in front of him, letting the warmth of the fire settle into his bones. He listened to the sound of his own breathing, slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the morning around him. Anna stirred softly in the other room, turning in her seat, pulling the blanket tighter around her body. She didn't wake. Just moved, as if adjusting to the same quiet that surrounded them both. Matthias smiled slightly, knowing that even in sleep, she was still with him. Still here. Still choosing this life. Still choosing him. And that, more than anything else, gave him peace. He closed his eyes once more, letting the morning wrap itself around him like an old lullaby. No rush. No fear. No need to explain. Just this. Just now. Just him, sitting by the fire, listening to the wind, and learning, slowly, gently, how to live with himself. How to find peace. Even in silence. Even in solitude. Even in the quiet hours of the morning. Where nothing changed. And yet, everything did. Part 7, A Small Faith in Peace. And now, as the night settles in and the fire burns low behind us, let's take one last quiet moment together before we say good night. You're still here with me, aren't you? Even after all these hours, even after walking through the streets of a medieval town, stepping into the shoes of a man few dared to understand, even after watching the sun rise and fall over rooftops and forests alike, you stayed. And for that, I thank you. Because tonight has never just been about history. It's been about presence. About stillness. About the gentle rhythm of words guiding you towards something soft and familiar, like slipping beneath warm blankets after a long day, like feeling the weight of your eyelids growing heavier with each breath. So if you're still awake, take another deep breath. Let your body sink deeper into wherever you are lying or sitting. Let go of whatever thoughts have been holding onto you. And if you've already drifted off, then may this voice be the last thing you hear before sleep wraps its arms around you. Matthias' story has reached its end, but not because it needed to finish, only because every journey deserves a place to rest. He found peace not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the small things, in the warmth of a shared home, in the steady rhythm of daily life, in the quiet understanding between two people who chose each other again and again. And perhaps that is where peace truly lives, not in escape, not in forgetting, but in simply being. Being seen. Being understood. Being held gently by someone who knows exactly who you are and stays anyway. If there's anything Matthias taught us, it's that peace doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the hush of the forest, in the flicker of candlelight, and the sound of rain tapping gently against the roof. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a story whispered softly into the night, meant not to wake you up, but to guide you gently into sleep. The night has settled in fully now. Outside, the world is wrapped in a hush so deep it feels almost sacred. No footsteps echo through the streets. No voices rise from behind shuttered windows. Even the wind seems to have paused its wandering, leaving only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird, soft, slow, unhurried. Inside the cottage, the fire has nearly burned out, its embers glowing faintly in the hearth like distant stars fading into morning light. Matthias sits by the window one last time, his hands resting lightly on his lap, his breath steady and even. He doesn't move much anymore, not because he's tired, but because he no longer feels the need to rush. There's no hurry here. Not tonight. Not ever. He watches the moonlight spill across the garden, painting everything in pale silver ribbons. The frost has returned, coating the grass in a delicate layer of white. The chickens are tucked safely inside their coop, and the cat has curled up near the hearth, tail twitching slightly in its sleep. Everything feels still. Everything feels safe. And somehow, that is enough. Matthias exhales slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle more comfortably around his shoulders. Not heavy. Not painful. Just present. It was a familiar kind of silence, one that had grown with him over the years, wrapping itself around him like a well-worn coat. And in this silence, his thoughts begin to wander, not wildly, not chaotically, but gently, like leaves drifting down from a tree on a still autumn afternoon. He thinks about what it means to leave something behind, not in the way kings and conquerors do, with monuments and names carved into stone, but in the quiet, unseen ways that linger long after we're gone. A warm meal shared at the end of a hard day. A hand held in silence. A story whispered softly into the night. That, too, is a legacy. One that may never be written in books or sung in songs, but one that lives on in the hearts of those who were lucky enough to witness it. Anna sleeps peacefully in the next room, her breathing slow and even, her presence a quiet comfort that wraps around Matthias like an old lullaby. He doesn't wake her. He never does. Instead, he lets himself sit here a little longer, listening to the silence, letting it hold him like an old friend who knows exactly what he needs without needing to ask. You're still with us, aren't you? Even after all these hours, even after walking beside Matthias through morning frost and evening mist, even after stepping into the quiet corners of his life, you stayed. And for that, thank you. Because tonight was never just about history. It was about presence. About connection. About the gentle rhythm of words guiding you towards something soft and familiar, like slipping beneath warm blankets after a long day, like feeling the weight of your eyelids growing heavier with each breath. So if you're still awake, take another deep breath. Let your body sink deeper into wherever you are lying or sitting. Let go of whatever thoughts have been holding onto you. And if you've already drifted off, then may this voice be the last thing you hear before sleep wraps its arms around you. Matthias' story has reached its end, but not because it needed to finish, only because every journey deserves a place to rest. He found peace not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the small things, in the warmth of a shared home, in the steady rhythm of daily life, in the quiet understanding between two people who chose each other again and again. And perhaps that is where peace truly lives, not in escape, not in forgetting, but in simply being. Being seen. Being understood. Being held gently by someone who knows exactly who you are and stays anyway. If there's anything Matthias taught us, it's that peace doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the hush of the forest, in the flicker of candlelight, and the sound of rain tapping gently against the roof. Sometimes it comes in the form of a story whispered softly into the night, meant not to wake you up, but to guide you gently into sleep. And so, as we reach the final pages of this tale, I want to leave you with one last thought. You don't need to fight for peace. You don't need to chase it or earn it or prove yourself worthy of it. Peace is already here. In the quiet. In the stillness. In the gentle rhythm of your own breath. So close your eyes. Let the world slow down. Let your mind drift. And know, even if just for a little while, that you are safe. You are seen. You are allowed to rest. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.